So I might get into trouble for making this video. I say that not as clickbait or exaggeration, but just simply because I get genuinely nervous to give an opinion that is even remotely political on this channel. Because these days, people get offended by everything, and on this channel, I just want people to have fun. And my goal is never to offend anybody or make anybody stressed out. But this stuff has gotta stop.
If you're seeing this, you've reached Classical Music is Racist TikTok.
I'll play the full video in a minute, but first I'm going to set the stage for you. So as y'all probably know, there is a political spectrum. On the right side, you have people who are more politically conservative, and on the left side, you have people who are more politically liberal or progressive. And on the farthest ends of the spectrum, you have people with the most extreme radical viewpoints on either side of the aisle. And the people who I found on the radical left side of the spectrum basically believe that just about everything under the sun is racist. Just about every mild inconvenience is the result of either white supremacy or the patriarchy or both. And I'm not saying everybody who has liberal viewpoints believes this stuff, but just like there are radical right-wing groups who have beliefs that are just completely detached from reality, in my opinion, the people on the radical left have claimed some of the most insane things you can possibly imagine, and most of them live on TikTok. I've seen people claim that milk is racist. I've seen people claim that soap is racist. I even saw another TikTok that said if you eat meat, then you're racist because only black people should be allowed to eat meat because they invented barbecue or something. TikTok has just become an absolute cesspool of virtue signaling and flawed logic. This video that we're about to go into, I actually don't mind as much because I can see the rationale behind it. And even though I don't agree with it, I can at least follow the train of thought that led to these conclusions. Some of these other guys, they're just not living in reality at all. They're on a completely different planet from you and me. So why am I making this video? Really, I just felt like I could offer a unique perspective on this issue. I studied music in college, so I felt that I could kind of draw from my own experience and speak on some of the claims that this lady makes. Like I said, I can kind of see where this person is coming from, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to open up a discussion about the music education system and what needs to be improved and what else, just thought this would be an interesting conversation to have. So without further ado, I'm going to play the TikTok in full, and then we will delve right in.
The fact that classical music, which is really the music of 18th century Western European cis-straight white male composers, is valued as the highest form of art music in America is an example of white supremacy. Those who go to college to study music will spend countless hours studying music theory, Western music history, and more, and most schools only have one class requirement or no class requirements for world music. This means that educators are woefully unprepared to meet the standards of understanding global interdisciplinary and 21st century connections with music. Task forces like this one are arguing that the music major needs to be changed to be more all-encompassing and actively anti-racist. But in the meantime, those who are music educators have to struggle and wrestle with the question, how can I be actively anti-racist in teaching music in a system that values white supremacy? Follow me to find out.
So the first thing we need to do here is identify what exactly her accusation is, because she makes a bunch of claims in this short video, but before we dissect this point by point, we need to find the broad overarching theme of the video. And that is essentially that college music programs are systemically racist because they predominantly teach Western classical music in their curriculums and don't offer enough education on music from other parts of the world or other cultures. So with that in mind, let's tackle the first claim that she makes here.
The fact that classical music, which is really the music of 18th century Western European cis-straight white male composers, is valued as the highest form of art music in America is an example of white supremacy.
First of all, we just have to reject the framing of this argument that just because it was made by white European males, that automatically means it's racist to listen to or learn about. She doesn't provide any evidence or reasoning behind this claim other than the fact it was written by cis, straight, European white males, so obviously that makes it white supremacy. And the reason why classical music is viewed as the highest form of art music in the world is because at the time, it kind of was. Just if we're looking from a technical aspect, classical music was by far the most advanced and complex form of music anywhere in the world, and one could argue still is. Not to mention the fact that most modern instruments were made in Europe and not available in any other parts of the world at that time. And the other big thing that she conveniently leaves out of this video is that Europeans were the one who developed the standardized way of writing and notating music that we continue to use today. Now, I wasn't going to go that deep into this at first, but the more I researched this, I found actually a lot of really interesting information. So buckle up and get ready to learn about the history of musical notation. So there's early evidence that ancient Babylon had a system of written music, but if we're going to look at musical notation as we all commonly know it today, that began in ancient Greece, and that spread all across Western Europe, where an Italian music theorist named Guido d'Arezzo introduced the four-stave system that we still use today. He also invented the concept of hexachords, time signatures, and solfege, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. This system continued to evolve throughout history until around the 17th century, when instrumental music began to overtake vocal choirs as the primary form of musical performance. And that's when things like bar lines, clefs, and dynamic markings entered the equation. Now, if we're going to look at musical notation systems outside of Western Europe, then we should start in China, who is believed to have the earliest known form of musical text. There was a tomb in China that, from about 400 BC, that had illustrations of chimes and bells organized in a way to indicate pitch and rhythm. There were also written scales and transpositions inscribed as well. And even though it seemed fairly advanced for the time, there are no written compositions in this system that were recovered from that time period. But somewhere between the 6th and 7th centuries, the Chinese developed a new system of musical notation called guqin, or as it's otherwise known as descriptive notation. This system didn't indicate pitch necessarily, but instead wrote out step-by-step instructions on how to play the melodies. I personally envision it as like a cookbook for music. In Japan around this time, they also developed a system of notation called Shakuhachi, which was sort of like a tablature for guitars, but instead of guitars, it was written for a traditional Japanese flute by the same name. And you can actually find on YouTube, if you look it up, there are a number of Shakuhachi virtuosos who combine elements of jazz and play jazz music on the Shakuhachi and are also fluent in reading the Shakuhachi musical notation form. Korea also had two different systems of notation called yukbo and yoljabo. Yukbo actually wrote out the onomatopoeia that the instrument was actually, or the sound that the instrument was actually supposed to make when you played it, which I thought was kind of interesting. And yoljabo, I have no idea if I'm saying any of these correct, by the way, but yoljabu was the most commonly used system of notation in Korea up until the Chinese introduced another system called gongche notation in around the 13th century, which remains Korea's primary form of music notation to this day. Gongche music notation introduced the concept of octaves and chromatics to written Chinese music. A special marking would be used to indicate the octave, and then the Chinese word for high would be inserted to raise the note by a semitone, and the Chinese word for low would lower the note by a semitone. It's pretty similar to guqin from what I can tell, but instead of using plain Chinese language to describe the notation, it uses certain characters to symbolize what note to play and how to play it. Then, in the mid-1700s, China introduced a numbered notation system called jianpu, where the numbers 1 through 7 was used to indicate different scale degrees from Do to Si. It was invented by a French Enlightenment thinker, so this system has obviously very heavy European influence, but it also introduced time signatures, accidentals, and bar lines to the Chinese musical notation system, and while it was invented in 1742, it didn't gain widespread acceptance in Asia until around the early 1900s, so the majority of music in this system was likely not written until well after the peak of European classical music. It's also worth mentioning that when we're talking about these non-European musical notation systems, we have to remember that while efforts are being made to recreate these systems in the present day from what we know about them, most of the original compositions written in these systems have been lost to time due to their age, which means that not only is there less readily available information on these systems to learn about in terms of how the system works and the way they were played, but there is also significantly more written material in the Western European system than these other systems that we all know today, which is why we know more about them, because there's just simply more to study from. And this brings us to Africa, which didn't have any written form of musical notation up until the late 1920s, Before then, traditional African music was played by ear and passed on orally from generation to generation. But in 1926, two forms of notation were introduced to the culture. There was the lebe notation and gris notation. The two kind of go hand in hand together from what I can tell, as one is used to indicate percussive rhythm, like where on the drum to hit it, whether to hit it with a closed or open fist, things like that. And the other integrates dance choreography of traditional African dance routines into the music, so it aligns the rhythm or the strikes of the percussion with a corresponding dance move. I hope you stayed with me through all that. I know it was a lot, but it is really, really important to hammer home the point that up until about 100 years ago, there was no written African music at all. None. Zero. Versus several centuries of written European classical music for us to learn and study from. It's such an important point because it's such an important piece to the argument that this TikToker is making, and she doesn't even mention it. Now, I'd also be willing to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that she probably doesn't know, but at the same time, she should at least have a basic understanding of the timeline. She is a music teacher according to her TikTok bio, so I would think she would at least have a basic knowledge of this stuff. But hey, I didn't learn this stuff in college. I had to research all this, so I'll give her the benefit of the doubt here, but still, let's move on to the next claim.
Those who go to college to study music will spend countless hours studying music theory, Western music history, and more, and most schools only have one class requirement or no class requirements for world music.
So her overall claim in this part is that college music programs are intentionally ignoring teaching music from other cultures in favor of white classical music. If I were having this conversation with her face to face, I would probably ask her what she defines as world music. If she's just talking about music from other parts of the world, I would again go back to the fact that there is little to no written music from that time period outside of Western Europe, and some parts of the Middle East, granted. But if she's talking about music just from people of color, people of other cultures, then I would just ask her simply one question: what about jazz music? When I went to college, I took a jazz history class as a required credit for my music major. There was also a jazz ensemble that I played in for one of my performance credits, and there was also a separate jazz improv class on top of that. I also looked up curriculums from other universities, and I found SUNY Fredonia, which has a very well-regarded music program, allows students to concentrate their major in jazz. And Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music schools in the country, offers jazz studies as its own separate major. And it's also in these majors where you will learn a lot more about world music, because jazz has deep roots in traditional African music, as well as influences from Cuban music as well. Music theory classes will also go into detail on the theory of jazz music, just because of how different it is from classical music theory. These classes that she has scrolling in the background, by the way, are beginner level classes, which only teach basic musical techniques that are a bit beneath the improvisational style of jazz and African music. The biggest difference between Western music versus music from other parts of the world is written versus improvisation, playing by sight versus playing by ear, reading the music rather than feeling it. Even when Africa developed a written notation system, that system still allowed space for improv and creative expression, whereas Western music is much more rigidly structured. The Europeans may have written the book on music theory, but the early jazz musicians rewrote a lot of these rules by taking classical European music theory and combining it with the improvisational style of traditional African music to create jazz music. And you also can't talk about things like seventh chords or diatonics without talking about jazz music, because those things are just so fundamental in what makes jazz music unique. You will learn the basic foundations of music theory that were developed by Western European composers, but then as you start to take more advanced classes, you'll learn about how those techniques and rules evolved and changed as people of different cultural backgrounds began to put their own spin on things. So I do not know how you can make the claim that these colleges are intentionally favoring music made by white composers when jazz music is such an integral part of the curriculum.
This means that educators are woefully unprepared to meet the standards of understanding global interdisciplinary and 21st century connections with music.
I'm not 100% sure what she means by multidisciplinary in this context. The dictionary definition of the word is to combine multiple academic disciplines or professional specializations in an approach to a topic or problem, which is a really difficult claim to back up because you're making broad assumptions based on, I don't even know what data she's using. Most schools that have a respectable music program will have professors who are multidisciplined. They can play and teach multiple instruments. They can teach different classes on a variety of topics. Band conductors pretty much have to be multidisciplinary just by default because you have to have knowledge on all the instruments as well as how they're all played, the difference of how their music is written, etc. But as far as the global aspect, I was in concert choir in high school and college, and we sang a bunch of traditional African and South American chants. I'd say if we sang 4 or 5 pieces per concert, at least one of them was some kind of ethnic piece. And those are some of my favorite songs to sing just because they're so rhythmic and high energy. But those choirs were both conducted by white men, and both of them were intimately familiar with the origin of the piece and the tradition behind it. It's also not very difficult to YouTube a college choir singing one of these pieces. Here's the Texas State University Choir singing a traditional South African song called Yukathula. I also found a college choir in Iowa singing an Indian song called Baile Laka. This isn't really a traditional song, it was written for a movie in India, but the song is a certified banger, so I just wanted to talk about it. But this claim also deals with how professors are ill-equipped to teach 21st century connections to modern music. And if I'm understanding what she's saying correctly, then I don't know how she can possibly make that claim. Once again, almost all of these schools that have an even slightly respectable music program have professional level studios and audio equipment for these audio production classes, which also allow students and professors to learn and explore modern music technology. My college actually had a beat production course where we learned things like DJing, sampling, and other forms of electronic music. Maybe not every school offers that course specifically, but the technology is still there where students can learn and experiment in modern musical and mixing techniques. I honestly don't know how she can make this claim.
Task forces like this one are arguing that the music major needs to be changed to be more all-encompassing and actively anti-racist.
I actually found the task force document that she is referencing at the end of this video, and it's actually pretty interesting. I read some of it, not all of it, because it's a 64-page document. But from what I read, it feels like this is less about racism and white supremacy and more about just better preparing students for a career in music by expanding the musical cultures that they study. And it makes what I don't think is an invalid point that modern music is influenced by many different cultures now, and teaching students a curriculum primarily focused around one genre can't hold them back when they go into the music industry. I don't think that's incorrect, and I certainly would not be opposed to changing the curriculum to make it a bit more balanced. But the task force document also cites ethnocentrism and racism. I mean, that's basically a fancy word for racism in this case, and they do describe it as, quote, a social justice crisis, but we'll get more into that in just a bit. The report does at least acknowledge the fact that colleges do teach jazz studies as a pretty central part of their curriculum, but it still downplays that quite a bit. It acts as if this is some kind of new development, like colleges only recently have begun to introduce jazz music as a part of its curriculum. And I didn't know how true that was, so I decided to research the history of jazz music in college academics to see just how long it's been around, which clearly isn't something that the task force did, by the way. From the looks of it, they didn't do any research. From the looks of it, this task force was just a bunch of people getting together in a room and talking and then reaching a consensus. But it's not as if we're just now experiencing a boom in the education of jazz music in colleges over the last couple years. Jazz music has been taught at the college level for several decades now. The very first jazz course was taught in 1940, then as the popularity of jazz music began to decline in favor of rock bands in the 60s and 70s, it began being taught on a more widespread level in universities as a way to preserve its legacy and train up the next generation of jazz musicians. So to downplay the role of jazz music in college musical academics strikes me as a bit intellectually dishonest in this case. Speaking of intellectually dishonest, this report was released back in 2014, and that would have been 6 years ago at the time that this TikTok was made. This TikTok was posted in October of 2020, and in this time in between, we've also seen a major increase in colleges offering courses in hip-hop history and culture, to the point where some colleges, including Tiffin University and McNally Smith College of Music, have offered hip-hop studies as its own major, kind of like jazz music. And the University of Arizona has actually begun offering it as a minor. Not to mention a ton of very prestigious academic institutions offer hip-hop studies as its own course, including Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, Princeton, just to name a few. In addition to the B production course I mentioned, the college I went to also offered a hip-hop culture course where I learned about the history of hip-hop music and the impact that it's had on American culture today. I also learned about the roots of African, Latino, and Caribbean music cultures that all combined to create hip-hop music. None of this is acknowledged in the task force report, even though a lot of the progress made in introducing hip-hop studies to the collegiate level occurred in the years leading up to this task force. And the role that hip-hop studies has had in our academic discourse has only continued to rise in importance in the years between the task force released this report and the making of this TikTok. So to take this outdated report, which already has pretty questionable reliability to begin with, and present it as current information is incredibly misleading in my opinion. But that's the entire TikTok. I vehemently disagree with it. I think it's misinformed at best, and I think it's deceptive at worst. I've been giving her the benefit of the doubt up to this point and taking this all in good faith, but if I'm being honest, there are things in here that make it very difficult for me to believe that she is not intentionally trying to mislead you. And she knows her stuff too. I'm not denying that she's well educated. She has another video on her TikTok where she talks about the history of clave and how it came from Africa and mixed into Latin America and how it mixed with Spanish and Portuguese musical traditions. It's actually pretty interesting. I didn't know that previously before I watched that, so I give her credit for that. But that again indicates that she is not ignorant at all. She knows what she's talking about and she is well educated. I'm not even complaining about the fact that she doesn't know her stuff about the notation history that I just went into. Like I said, I had to research that myself. They don't teach that in colleges, and maybe they should. It's pretty interesting. I'm not saying that the music education programs cannot or should not incorporate more music from other cultures in their curriculum, but I do think that the music being taught in the program already is more diverse and multicultural than this TikToker would let you believe. So that's all I got for you here today. Thank you very much for watching this video, especially if you stuck to the end. I really appreciate that. I know this video might have been a little bit more intense than usual. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody. I just thought this would be a fun video to respond to. At first it started off as just like I was going to respond to this and say that the TikTok was wrong and make fun of it kind of, but then as I started to do more research, I actually learned a lot of cool new things like the musical notation stuff. I thought that was all really interesting and worth doing a video on. So I tried to incorporate all that here, make this video as educational as possible so that even if you didn't agree with my take, you could still get something out of it. Also, I wanted to give a quick update too on my future plans for this channel. So the Warren Zevon series, don't worry, I'm still going to be working on that. So if you've been waiting on that, don't worry, it's still in the works. It's probably not going to come out by the end of this year, though, I'll just be honest with you. Billboard just released their year-end videos today as I'm recording this. So the rest of so this month of December is really going to be devoted to me working on the best and worst songs of the year lists. I'm going to hope to try and have those out by late December, early January. And then once those are done, I'm going to go right back to focusing all my time and energy on the Zevon series, and hopefully I'll be able to get the next video of that series, part 4, out by mid to late January. Bills are playing the Patriots tonight as I'm recording this as well, so hopefully this is coming to you after a Bills victory, but either way, let's go Buffalo.